Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with the valedictorian of Oscar viewing homework. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
This is wrong for a number of reasons. I'm a little drunk. I thought I could get drunk. I'm making a fool of myself, but thank you so much for this.
Because that was Pedro Pascal, I will forgive it for being technically a TV reference and not a Greg.
It's an award show reference, and we're here to talk award shows tonight. Our bread and butter. Funny to see you and not be talking about Dune, unless we want to predict next year's Oscars instead. But it's very exciting to be here to actually be at our predictions episode.
Yes, I'm excited too. It is Oscars week, everyone. Voting has closed. All the precursor awards, at least to my knowledge, have been given. It's like this is the home stretch, and everything's in an envelope, and we just need to wait until Sunday. The Oscars will air live on ABC on March 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Pacific. So that's actually a whole hour earlier than it has been for a long time. So that in case you aren't paying attention to that, I just want to point that out so you're not like tuning in and then you're like, wait, how did I miss all the supporting actor categories? So we are recording two very special episodes this week to share our final predictions in all 23 Oscars categories. So today, Greg and I are going to take half of the categories: actor, supporting actress, adapted screenplay, original score, international feature, animated feature, documentary feature, all of the shorts categories. That's right. All of the shorts categories, director and picture. So I'll explain in a minute why we are leaning in those categories with Greg specifically, that this was a planned thing. It's not just a random divvying up of these categories, but we will be recording with PT and Antonio a little later this week to tackle the remaining categories, mostly the craft and below the line categories. So that's sort of how we wanted to give everybody some juicy, big above the line categories. So we split those in half, and then sort of like we're dividing up the below the line sort of accordingly. But first, before we get to that, Greg, if listeners think we're deserving of an award after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Create one using arts and crafts and mail it to us. But also they could tune in to not miss any new episodes right when they drop by finding the Long Take Review wherever they are currently listening to this podcast right now. One of the best ways to do that is to subscribe to Jen's Substack, which is thelongtake.substack.com, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Overcast, YouTube, which is doing just gangbusters numbers for us all of a sudden, and much more, including more to come in the future. But while you're there, we always appreciate a nice review or a nice comment to help other people discover us. We feel like these Oscar shows are us at our best. This is really like our season finale in some ways, and then the whole race starts over again after we react to these. And so you can always also follow us on Instagram and Threads at Long Take Review, and Letterboxd at LTR Pod, and share your movies using LTR Pod. Whatever way you want to contact us, one of us will find it, and we will respond and have warm thoughts and loving feelings for you as we continue on our journey to make this a fun movie experience for everyone.
Thanks, Greg. So before we dig into the categories that we have set aside for us today, I just want to brag a little bit about you, Greg, because out of all four of us, you are the only one, and this is typically true. Like, this is not like a new thing. You have seen all of the films that have been nominated for any kind of Oscar. This is quite the achievement. It's something I aspire to do every year and fail miserably at. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that's like, how you're able to do it? How many films is that even? Anything that you want to share about what it takes to see all the Oscar movies?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying it is super fun, and I do it out of the pure joy of watching movies. And, if I'm left to my own druthers, I tend to see the blockbusters and kind of the big award season movies, but I don't necessarily seek out international cinema. I don't watch a lot of documentaries just on your average week. So I've made this one of my movie watching projects. This is the fourth year I've achieved it, although I believe one of those four, there was a documentary that didn't come out till the Monday after the ceremony. So I only got 3 that actually hit it before the ceremony. Um, this year was actually relatively easy because we had so many multiple award nominees. So I believe if you take, I think it was 38 of feature length films and 15 shorts this year. The shorts are always a little tricky, but I'm fortunate enough to be near theaters that run what's called the Shorts Showcase. And you can often find theaters in most areas that do the 5 live action and the 5 animated. The documentary can be a little trickier, but in recent years they've been bought up by like Netflix, or the New Yorker produced a lot last year, so you can often find them and have access to them. Um, in terms of the journey this year, I will say it was relatively easy because of those multiple nominees. As of nominations morning, I'd seen everything with 2 or more, and then I just had to start with your Flamin' Hots and your international features, and some of those got a little tricky this year. There's a Reddit community I go to called Oscar Death Race, which is all people trying to do this, and they share resources and have people tracking down like where things are playing at festivals. And then things get a little sketchy, like how you can go to Canadian YouTube and watch it with a VPN or something like that. And the community, I just want to emphasize, does not condone piracy, and they do not allow people to post pirated materials. So there were a couple that were really tricky this year. I would say the hardest is Robot Dreams, which is one of the 5 nominated for Best Animated Feature. It's getting a theatrical release from Neon on like May 30th, right when almost nobody will care anymore. But they did kind of, I think, read the room, and they got it out to theaters for a very limited, like one night only release a week or so ago, which I think helped a lot of people out. But it is crazy. If you start on nomination morning, I think it's way too difficult. But if you kind of have a productive fall and try to anticipate, then you make mistakes. I mean, I made sure I got to, well, no, Color Purple did make it in with 1 nomination. The beloved All of Us Strangers, I raced to make sure I had covered for this, and it did not make it. And there's always a few like that you're pretty sure will, and then they don't quite make it. Napoleon got a few. So there's always a few
Got
like
3.
that. Yeah, way more than I expected it to. I thought it was going to get 0.
The Robot Dreams was the movie I was going to ask about, actually, because I just really love the animated feature category, and that's one I do
Mm.
try to see every single one. And there were maybe Neon was advertising 2 screenings, like special screenings up in LA, which like I could have gone to, but it's tough. Like, and so like because I live just far enough away that it's like kind of an ordeal to have to go to a movie up there. And so PT manages to drag me to screenings every once in a while, but it's like an ordeal. It's like it's like a whole day. It takes a whole day for me to get up there and back after seeing a movie. So it's that was the one where I was like, what are we doing? Like, release this movie so we can see it. Now I sound like
Yeah.
you. Let us see the movies. Because I
Yeah.
feel like it's one of those things where by May 3rd, because spoiler for our discussion later, it's not really at the front of, it's not likely to win
No.
animated feature. And
No.
so I think people are just going to not care about it after Sunday. So like,
Yeah, I mean,
oh
it
well.
feels like it'll have no real theatrical gross, and then when it appears on Hulu in like July, because I think Neon still has the Hulu deal, people will
Yeah.
click on it and they'll enjoy it, and they'll be like, "That was really great," but it's just kind of missing its opportunity and its moment. And that it's tricky. The people on that Reddit page are, I think they're mostly like angry 17-year-olds. They're like, "What's the point in owning a movie if you don't put it out?" and things like that. And like I think the business is much more complicated than even us weirdos on this podcast give it credit for, to understand the finances of it. But it seems to me just silly to not find some way to make things available. I think 2 years ago there was one live action short that really held out for a long time because wanted to get their investment back and get the biggest audience, and almost didn't put it in the shorts category. And it was like, what's the point? Like, if you're not in there, then nobody's going to see it. But eventually found a deal. So all respect to artists, obviously, but it is tricky. I will keep pressuring you and PT and Antonio. I have not pressured as much in person, but will. I always think of Antonio and I as, you know how when the president gives the State of the Union, they keep one cabinet member far away. That's Antonio and I. It's
Yes.
like, yeah, we can only have 3 on at a time, and then we put the other one in the safe location.
So who's
Uh,
the John Goodman in that scenario from West Wing, right?
no comment. So yeah, but everybody should try to do it. I mean, it's a privilege of time. When you were mentioning those like one screening things, that also means it's usually like 6 o'clock on a Tuesday, which is really hard when you're a parent. And I'm lucky that my wife gives me the flexibility to get out at screenings like that. But it's not easy, and I don't make light of it, but it's a really fun kind of goal to have, especially if you need to be kind of shoved to go see international or documentary because they're challenging. If the shorts are showing near you, it's a great night out. I dragged my friend Ben to it this year, and we watched animated was kind of short, so they threw 2 extras on. So we watched 7 animated shorts and then ran literally to a brewery down the street, had a quick pint, and then ran back for the live action. And the live action, as we'll get into, are very draining this year. And so at the end of those, we were like, woof, what a night. We should have had 2 beers and then gone on. But
Or
it's
they
really
should have
fun, and
reversed it.
you can
So
do that. Yeah, I mean, it was our choice, but yeah, because I think
oh, I see.
they
Yeah, yeah,
kept
yeah.
alternating
Because they
all
were showing
night.
them separately.
Yeah, but
Oh,
yeah, we
okay.
should have
So
reversed
so
those.
in my defense, I kept checking my movie ticket apps
Mm,
to see if there was a short screening near me, and there hasn't been one still. So I'm sure that again, it's like this my suburb problem of like I
yeah.
don't live close enough to the big city to have easy access to what's there, but something like that I feel like is probably not playing at my local theater necessarily. So I tried my best. We'll get into it. So um, we are gonna go through. We're gonna start with the acting categories that we have slated for our half of the predictions 2-parter, and then we'll kind of work our way down to the shorts. I think we have those sort of towards the end. I will include timestamps in our post, so if people just want to dip in and out for certain categories, they can do that. But this basic structure we're going to do is we're going to read the nominees, and then Greg and I both have put down for most of the categories. I sort of like fizzled out towards the end. I'll just improvise when we get to the bottom of the Google Doc. But we have who we think will win, and who we think should win. Now, if you're sort of new to the Oscar game, then you probably don't realize that this is a very important distinction, because the prediction of who we think the Academy will like and who the Academy is going to vote for can be very different than our own personal preferences. So that's just
Mm.
something to make sure that we make a distinction of that. Like when we say, oh, something is going to win, that doesn't necessarily mean that we endorse that win. And sometimes it might, but it won't always mean that. The other thing too is number one, to me at least, number one rule of Oscar predicting is separate your heart from your mind. Because the second you start using your own personal preferences to hope, it's called hope dicting. Once you start doing that, it's a slippery slope and it's very dangerous and can ruin your entire Oscar pool. So yeah, I guess we should also say these 2 episodes that we're going to do this week are also designed to help you win your Oscar pool. We've done all the work for you. Greg's seen all the movies. I've paid attention to the pundits all year, and so hopefully between the 2 of us, we can get you some solid advice on what to mark on your ballot on Sunday.
Well, I was going to say, to that end, I just love being contacted by the people outside of Oscar discourse, because it's like I become popular all of a sudden. So most recently, my mom texted me and she's like, I'm at work, sweetie, and we're talking about the Oscars. What do you think will win Best Picture? And if you're inside the bubble, it's like such a silly question. But if you're outside the bubble, why would you know that it's 100? Well, I won't say what it's going to be, but it's very clear what
We'll
should
get,
be your
we'll get
prediction.
there.
So we'll get there. That
Uh,
doesn't mean you have to
I'm gonna
like
have
it, but it's
us
very clear what the prediction should be, like you said. So
right.
it's a
Exactly.
reminder that, not everybody is inside Oscar discourse the way we are.
That's usually my Oscars party at my house. We usually host like a few friends to come over. I'm gonna try to have some Best Picture nominee themed snacks, maybe
Mm.
some egg tarts, maybe some Jim Beam. I don't know. Like I have a list going. Maybe I'll post it to social media to get people's ideas about like do we what do I do for Oppenheimer? I feel like So anything with mushrooms in poor taste.
Yeah, mushroom
So
caps.
yeah, I don't know. That seems weird. But yeah, it's stuff like that. So if you have suggestions, you're listening to this and you have suggestions for what kind of snacks I should have to honor our Best
Mm.
Picture nominees, please let me know. But usually it's me yelling at the TV and being very locked in and invested in what's going on, and everyone else eating snacks and being like, "Oh, Jen's so funny." Um, she cares
Isn't
about
she
this so
funny?
much. Yeah.
All
So
right, I have
I'm
one
the entertainment.
I have one snack before we really get started, and then we really will. I think you have to rent a snow cone machine and just do a white snow cone with just a little red, just for Anatomy of a
For
Fall, like the
anatomy,
poster, right? Yeah.
that's
The
really
blood
dark,
on the
Greg.
snow. It's really
That's
dark, but
really
also delicious. And who doesn't want to go to a party with a snow cone machine?
well,
I
they're
mean,
gonna
your
be
kids will
little
be
kids.
happy.
I was gonna say they're gonna be little kids and they're gonna be asking lots of questions about why the snow cone looks the way it does, and I don't know if I want to answer those questions. The thing I had planned for Anatomy of a Fall was French red wine and maybe some cheese, um,
Mm,
because she's drinking red wine in that infamous opening scene.
yeah.
Um,
And the
but yeah,
pre-show
I
is
need low
just
maintenance.
the
I can't rent
song
a
over and
snow
over.
cone machine, Greg. Like I need low maintenance ideas, things I could
Oh,
buy at Costco.
do you know what's perfect? Child of the 80s like me. Did you have the Snoopy code snow cone machine when you were little?
I
And
did.
it's Snoop and it's snow cones. It's perfect. But yeah, it's
Oh, that's
kind of hard to
true.
locate
I
one
don't
of those
have it
these days.
anymore. Yeah, that's a probably a pricey purchase on eBay, would be
Yeah,
my
yeah.
guess. It's looking into the Dune sandworm bucket's future, as you mentioned last episode. Anyway, I think yeah, we've see we're so excited for Sunday that we're getting off track. I think
All
we gotta
right.
get into it if we're gonna get through all these categories. So first, we're gonna start with Best Actor. The nominees are Bradley Cooper for Maestro, Coleman Domingo for Rustin, Paul Giamatti for The Holdovers, Cillian Murphy for Oppenheimer, Jeffrey Wright for American Fiction. Greg, who will win this? What's your prediction?
Well, I will say, I think it's Killian Murphy. He's just won too many along the way, and the Oppenheimer steamroller is so large. That is not to say he's not deserving. I would say of our frontrunners in the acting categories, I've been most disappointed in his speeches, which I have feel are just kind of vanilla. And apologies, we're going to be kind of catty and mean, but that's just the truth. Like I think we're getting some really good speeches through the award season, and his have just been, oh, okay, he won and he's happy and he thanks Christopher Nolan, and it's not really memorable. So uh that's where I'll put it. I will say I was listening to a really fantastic podcast earlier today called The Long Take Review, where they were reviewing All of Us Strangers and made some really good points about how oftentimes the voters are only checking out like the first half hour of these movies. And while I do think Killian Murphy is still my will win, that's a strong case for some of the others in this category. I would say Giamatti and Bradley Cooper because they come on strong, right? Uh, Jen, I think we are in agreement on this one. Do you want to talk about why I should be more generous to Killian Murphy?
Well, yes. So I think Cillian Murphy had this locked up. It was a race between Cillian Murphy and Paul Giamatti, but I think Cillian Murphy winning SAG kind of like sealed the deal. But I think that it really speaks to the quality of Cillian Murphy's performance itself. That despite Paul Giamatti being super charming, because he's sort of the opposite of what you're describing, all of his speeches have been A+, and
Yeah.
he's at In and Out with his Golden Globe. He's then continuing to drop hints that he would be happy to be sponsored by In and Out for his Oscars campaign. Like he's had a great award season, he still can't. I think he's still not going to be able to win over Cillian Murphy, and I think that is because his Cillian Murphy's performance in Oppenheimer is just like so undeniable. He's really making like I feel like he's a make or break performance for that film, and he just has to sustain so many close ups, and
Mm.
and he really has to play a range. And I feel like I've said this on previous episodes, but he really does have to kind of play to the excited scientist, but also moral quandaries. And like, there's just a lot of layers to his character. And honestly, I think that's the success of Oppenheimer is synonymous with him and Christopher Nolan. We'll get there later, but it's synonymous with him because he's able to maintain that complexity. And I think there could easily have been an Oppenheimer biopic with a lesser actor that would not have been as complex. And so and just been like, "Hey, I do science. Oh, I made a bomb." Right? Like, but there's so much.
Oh, I
There's
made
so
a
much more
bomb
to
of a
it.
movie. Oh,
Oh,
yeah. No. Well, and I'm gonna go ahead and transition over to should win. I actually really struggled about whether I should put Paul Giamatti in my should win because I do think his win would be more of a career Oscar because he hasn't had one and he is just such a phenomenal actor and it feels like we are taking him a little bit for granted. Um and I think it comes down to, if this was the old Academy, I would lean towards him because it's such a fun curmudgeon old person. But where we've diversified and we've made the voting body younger, it just feels like Cillian Murphy's going to edge him out again there. So my actual should win, I went with Jeffrey Wright. Hey, here's the end of the journey. I'm going to stay tight on American Fiction and say that I just to update listeners because we have been podcasting every 6 hours, it feels like. I did finish American Fiction with my wife last night, and we both enjoyed the end of it. And kind of watching that for the second time, which I had not done, it is really good, and it's a really nice, quiet movie. It's a reminder that movies don't have to be big and crazy, and none of that movie works if Jeffrey Wright doesn't hold it all together. And the way that Sterling K. Brown bounces off him, the way Issa Rae bounces off him, like it's all just really good. And I'm such a big Jeffrey Wright fan. It would definitely be again a kind of career Oscar, but I think it's sunsetting. His chances are sunsetting right now. So my hope is that somebody sees this and gives him another real good, strong leading man role, and he's back in a couple years or so. Jen, who's your should win?
my should win is Cillian Murphy for all the reasons I said earlier. I mean, and it's funny because I almost didn't put him just for the sake of variety, but then I was like, you know what? Sometimes people are front runners for a reason, and I feel
Yeah.
like you can. That's true of a lot of the acting categories this year. Just because someone's going to win doesn't mean that they shouldn't win. I've trained myself to be so cynical when predicting the Oscars, but sometimes it's not necessary. So yeah, I fully support his win. I'll be really happy. That said, to go off what you just said about Paul Giamatti, I am going to be very sad that he may go on without an Oscar at all, and that he's
Hmm.
still that we he missed out for Sideways, and that this could have been a good opportunity to, and it maybe in any other year it could have been an opportunity for him to correct that. But the thing I heard from so many critics was that why they were sort of like doubtful that he might actually pull it off, even with this sort of like makeup award sort of
Hmm.
mentality of like he didn't get it for Sideways, is because he makes it look too easy. That his performance
Hmm.
style is like so effortless that people are like, "Oh, it's just Paul Giamatti being amazing." Like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they don't think of it as like, "Oh, he's working so hard," like we do with some other actors. So like, and I actually would say the same thing for Jeffrey Wright. Like I think he also makes it look easy, like he's not doing
Yeah.
a lot of heavy lifting. So yeah, I don't know, but I think there'll be lots of opportunity. And I have heard that for Coleman Domingo, at least, there's a movie coming out next year that's already been on the festival circuit a little bit called Sing Sing. That's about the prison
Hmm.
that he's in. That's amazing, and a lot of people are like, yeah, he might get nominated again easily for that. So let's keep our fingers crossed that everyone on this list gets another crack at it. If they lose to Cillian Murphy. All right. So next we have Best Supporting Actress. Greg, do you want to do the honors and read those? We can switch
Yeah,
off.
so this is gonna be a boring category for us. So let's at least acknowledge all of the nominees. So that's Emily Blunt for Oppenheimer, famous for our text as soon as we got out of Oppenheimer that said, "Oh my God, Emily Blunt." Danielle Brooks for The Color Purple, America Ferrera for Barbie, Jodie Foster for Nyad, and Davine Joy Randolph for The Holdovers. Jen, who's your will win?
My will win. This is probably the easiest. So if you put your predictions on Gold Derby, it's sort of like a contest, like you get points and stuff like that. You don't actually win anything. It's just bragging rights and being on the leaderboard on the website. But you can put two super bets on two different categories of your choice. So like if you get it right, then it
Hmm.
doubles your points. And so this is the one I'm going to be putting my super bet on because I feel like this is the
Yeah.
most secure of all predictions that I probably will have this year, because Davine Joy Randolph has just won every single thing she possibly could have won. and there's no stopping her. So, and that's, to me, that's really well deserved. And like, again, it's one of those things where it's like sometimes people are in the front and in the lead for a reason, because they're amazing and they deserve it. And so, yeah, I think I just have a hard time looking at this list thinking of who could be a spoiler after the season that Davine has had. I don't know. Like, if there's a crazy upset, like who's winning, I guess.
I mean, so this is probably more my personal number two would probably be Jodie Foster. Like, if True Detective is really doing as well as it seems to be doing for everybody except the creator of True Detective, then I can imagine she'd have like a little bit of wave and just some general good affection. I mean, I've only heard critics saying positive things about, like, Naiad is not that great, but it's really nice to have Jodie Foster back. And maybe we should write parts for women over 50 more often so we get these actresses around more frequently. Um, but I really don't see it happening. So my will win is also Davine. I don't do Gold Derby. Maybe I should, but I would definitely do the super bet thing, exactly like you said. And this is a little bit about. So she is also my should win, and this is. You said essentially the same thing about Killian Murphy, which is when somebody is such a clear front runner, you can get cynical very
Mhm.
easily. But I am not cynical about her at all. And she was on Mark Maron's podcast. Well, I listened to it this week, so it was probably about 3 weeks ago. And it was just a reminder that she's so great. And she walked through her path to this role and her, her career. And I don't think we should take for granted that this is not the type of actress who usually gets these really great juicy parts, and that's both because she's a woman of color and she's a woman, and not kind of traditional Hollywood body model shape, right? And all of that is kind of working against her, but she's just such an incredible presence. And what blew me away is they were talking specifically about the Massachusetts accent and how hard it is. And she explained to Mark Maron, who lived in Boston for a number of years, that her accent is actually 1970s Boston, that she only trained by looking at clips from the 1970s, like man on the street news interviews. And that's how she learned the accent. So there are times when I remember watching this movie and being like, that's a little weird. And I really want to watch it again now to really kind of say, like, is it because the Massachusetts accent, for people not from here, when it shows up in movies, it's always bad. Like,
Mhm.
everybody in The Departed except Mark Wahlberg is bad at it. Matt Damon, I guess, manages it, but like, I will always remember our dear, dear president, uh,
Martin Sheen?
Martin Sheen. God, that was bad. It's been a long day. Martin
It's okay.
Sheen in The Departed is abysmal at the Boston accent. So,
Oh,
and
that's
like,
true.
he's a great actor. So it really goes wrong really easily. And so she seems to have nailed it pretty well. And there are this, I'm going to revise that to the scenes I will remember from the holdovers are her acknowledging she listens from the kitchen, her watching the match game, and especially her in her nephew's, soon to be nephew's room, kind of giving over the baby items. Like, it's a great performance, and she deserves every single little bit of it.
Yeah, and she plays off Dominic Sessa and Paul Giamatti so well. And I'm trying to
Mm.
picture that movie without her, and it's just the two of them. And I feel like it's too much. You know what I mean? Like, she provides such balance, both in terms of her character, but mostly her performance and the energy she's sort of bringing to that trio. And the thing I'm never going to forget is her with listening to the record player at that Christmas party. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
to me is like that whole sequence. I think the Christmas party part is her best work in the whole movie and is incredible. So yes, we fully support this win. This is also my should win. It's funny looking at our Google Doc and just Davine Joy Randolph, boom, 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 all across the row. And that might be the only one that's true for. So yeah, I think there could be some crazy upset, but it's so unlikely. Like, don't bet much. Like, don't bet against Davine. Just don't. It's
Yeah,
not smart.
yeah.
You can get frisky in other categories with your predictions. Try to be offbeat in other categories. Not this one, I would say. But yeah, but I do want to defend Emily Blunt very
Mm.
briefly, because I feel like she became kind of the villain of this category, weirdly,
Yeah.
like, because people were like, we want her to win an Oscar, but not for this. And like, we let people win for Oscars for like movies that aren't their best all the time. So like, don't give
Yeah.
me that. And she actually is really good, just because like I feel like we shouldn't be punishing her just because Christopher Nolan's not that good at writing female characters. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
which I will concede is the weak part of that movie, but I feel like her performance is not the problem, and that when she's giving her testimony in that deposition or whatever, like she's that it's just such a joy to watch
Yeah.
her be amazing. And so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just want to say like I think her performance has now been underrated because of the award season machine and discourse and stuff like that. Um
I I think that's right. I was recently reminded of I think also snubbed across the board Oscar movie First Man, the Ryan Gosling starring Neil Armstrong movie, and Claire Foy, who again you just sang the praises of in All of Us Strangers, is playing Neil Armstrong's wife, and it exactly fits this cliche mold, except she doesn't get the good scene. And I
mm,
completely agree. Emily Blunt is incredible in that scene. And yes, she should have gotten a lot more. And there are very I don't think you've ever actually seen the Dewey Cox fake music biopic parody. Well worth a watch, but
okay,
there's
no, I haven't.
the cliche of the wife is that she's always like every time you see his wife, she's just got another baby on her and is struggling to like manage the household and keep him under control. And I think this does fall, unfortunately, into some of those cliches pretty hard. But, I also think sometimes criticism borders on patronizing in this
Hmm.
case. And I would liken it to Margot Robbie in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where all of a sudden the critics are like, but you didn't get any lines and you still blah, blah, blah. And she's like, hey, I read the script. I knew what I was doing. Chill out, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like I haven't heard Emily Blunt say that, but she would. She'd be like, I wanted to
Hmm.
do this. Like, I think joining a movie just for one good scene, that's a fine career move and should be. So I'm glad you're defending her. I don't think either of us are saying give her the award, but I'm glad she's in the mix too.
Same. Um, yeah, and I'd say the same for America Ferrera, who campaigned really hard, but I think it's not going to amount to anything in the end,
Yeah.
because Dave Vine is sort of such a powerhouse. All right, so next up is Best Adapted Screenplay. So the nominees are American Fiction, Barbie, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. Barbie really shook this up when it got placed in here. So Greg,
Mm.
who are you predicting to win?
Jen, is there a term for the opposite of hope dicting where you don't want your heart to say what you really think? So you get
Oh,
cynical and
yes,
be like, they'll never give it to that. So I'll just pick the
I've
cynical
definitely done
choice.
that. Hmm.
So that's what I'm doing in this category at the moment, which I did struggle with this when I was filling out the doc. I went for Barbie here, and I really just think the snub narrative, which we've already problematized plenty on this podcast, I think that's powerful. And since this is the place they can recognize Greta, they might try to. Um, I recognize that this kind of goes against a lot of the precursors and, predictions and so on. I just have this awful feeling that, the simplistic minds, PT, other host of this program, has been sharing a lot of the like mystery Oscar ballot reports with us. And just those make you realize that these voters are so silly and we put so much stock into like these idiots making these choices. Um, and I just feel like, I think there's something to maybe Barbie can get an award here and you can get Greta on stage, and also Noah Baumbach, but I think he'd have the sense not to speak. I think he'd just stand next to her.
That's fair. I would assume that too. Yeah, I think those anonymous Oscar ballot articles, the path to madness, Greg. Don't pay any attention to those. I mean, they are kind of like fun because some of them are so insane where you're just like, who is this person? How could
Mm.
they love this movie and yet hate this movie? Like none of this makes any sense. You know what I mean? And so, or just like, I think the one I looked at that PT sent us was like, someone was like, I just didn't think any of the directors in the directing category, like, so I'm not going to vote in it at all, or something weird like
Yeah.
that. Like they didn't, like the person they
They
wanted didn't get in, so they weren't going to vote for anybody.
Yeah, they were Alexander Payne heads. So they're like, because Payne
Oh,
was
that's right.
snubbed, I'm not going to vote for any of these, which is
It's crazy.
insane.
Yeah. So I have been burned by those before. I believe that is what caused me to predict Penelope Cruz to win for Parallel Mothers, whatever year that was. And then it turned out at the last minute I switched to her, and then it was wrong. This is the bane of my Oscars predicting existence, because I could have gotten a much better, I think, score had I not done that. And I feel like it's A, like they get published because they're crazy outliers, and B, because
Yeah.
like they're just one person, right? And so you can't like generalize based on them. It's really, again, the path to madness. But anyway, I mean, I like your Barbie logic. I think that's possible. The thing, it's funny because we're splitting this up into 2 episodes. I haven't done my like Charlie Day map, conspiracy map thing where I'm
Yeah.
looking at the whole thing to make sure it adds up. I haven't done that yet. And so I keep being like, 2 things. One, are the numbers adding up? Like in terms of like, if whatever I think is going to win Best Picture, does it have enough nominations? Or like, that's just an example. I don't think that's a good example for this year in particular, but because I think we'll get there. And then the other thing too is like, what is the spoiler? Like, what's the thing no one's going to see coming? It can't all be we predicted this the whole time, which so many of these categories feel like. And so where's
Yeah.
going to be the surprise? And I feel like this has a potential, because I'm saying American Fiction is going to win because the sort of the precursor stats support that. And American Fiction has surprised in a couple places like BAFTA, where people were like, "Oh, American Fiction,"
Mm.
and so I think, and like a lot of critics are sort of saying, "So yeah, American Fiction, that's happening, right? Like that's it seems like it's happening now." To the point where like they're not even thinking about the other nominees, which seems crazy to me. But that's what I'm going to go with right now. I do think if we're looking at a spoiler, if Oppenheimer even overperforms than what we're thinking it's going to, it could get, people could just be ticking off Oppenheimer because they're ticking it off everywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it would be deserving, I think. Like I actually have that as my should win, because I think as an adaptation, the more I think about it, the more there are more ways this movie could have been horrible. You know what I mean? It could
Mm.
have gone so wrong and fallen into so many traps with like adapting history, adapting the biopic, and all that sort of stuff. So that's, yeah. I think American Fiction, but I think Oppenheimer should win. That's not to say I would be super happy if Barbie won too. Like that's the thing. This category
Mm.
is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna steal one from the next episode and say I think it's pretty strong that Barbie walks away with the song, and
Mm-hmm.
that could, in some minds, be like, well, we gave it the one award it
Yeah.
needed, but I think there was such an uproar the 2 days after nominations about Greta that's just made me nervous. My should win is American Fiction, because I really like this movie and I like its adaptation. When I finished it with my wife last night, I was saying, part of what I always wonder about this category is, which word gets emphasized when you say best adapted screenplay? Is it the best screenplay that happens to be adapted, or
Yeah.
is it the best adaptation that becomes a screenplay? And because I said this is the one where I read this book. I haven't read any of the other books, and I really enjoyed kind of how they played with it a little and yet stayed very faithful to it. And my wife, in typical fashion, looked at me like I was a crazy person. She said, "Of course, it's best screenplay that happens to be adapted. They don't read the books." And I was like, "Oh, right. Like, no Oscar voter is going to be like, let me sit and read these 5 books and contemplate the quality of the adaptation and the heavy hand in that." And so, I think as we've gone through these nominees on different shows, we've mentioned that, Zone of Interest and Oppenheimer kind of take a big change, a big adaptation move, and change their materials quite a bit. I would not say that American Fiction is a huge departure from Erasure, the book it's based on. I don't really have a read on Poor Things in that regard, but I don't know. Do you? Do you think it's close to its source material, or is it very different?
I've heard that it's fairly close, but that it depends, because if my neighbor Amanda is reading it, and she was like, it's very close, but makes a couple of interesting changes, but it doesn't sound like anything like super like crazy. And
Mm.
then Mike and Oscar, whose running bit all season has been, what is steampunk? Um, said they reported that quote, the book is uh, Scottish steampunk nonsense. So like so it sounds like it's the book may be like a lot denser, and so the screenplay is sort of like making a lot of smart choices to sort of convert it into a movie that's 2 plus like, you know, a little over 2 hours, so, and to streamline the story and whatnot. So that's all I know.
So, the only other data point I'll throw in favor of American fiction is I think sometimes we have forgotten Cord Jefferson is actually very well known. He used to write for Gawker, I believe. And so people in journalism and critics like know him a lot, and I think they have affection for him. And while that's not exactly who votes for Oscars, there's some overlap there. And so I think, you know, some people will want to see him rewarded somehow. And you know, I remain, just because I think this is probably the end of our American fiction talk, I remain impressed and shocked that it got 5 nominations. So I think that does mean there's some goodwill for the film
Mm-hmm.
there, and I think enough to get it one award. And if it's going home with one, I think it's this one.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And in a year where Oppenheimer is dominating so much, I feel
Mm,
like it is going to be one for you, one for there's going to be a spread the wealth, but only one for each other film
yeah.
that gets something. You know what I mean? So I think I like that logic. And if Barbie is already covered in another category, then that's a tick against it. And then actually, if we were using the adaptation filter, I think Barbie is kind of like, you know,
Who knows?
well, I think it hurts like it's hurt in both categories, right? Because it was
Yeah.
not, because it was IP, it didn't qualify for original, but I think because it's IP, technically according to the Academy's parameters, it qualifies for adapted. But people are going to be, since there's no source text, people are going to be like, well, that
Mm.
wasn't really adapted. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's kind of like it can't win either way. And
Yeah.
so that might be, that's, if we're thinking, but I think it's interesting because I think in some years where there's like a bunch of nominees and like one or two big recognizable like great books or something that are in there, then that tends to kind of skew the votes because people are like, oh, like I know that book, or like, you know, like, oh wow, they've really converted great literature to cinema, right? Like I think there's a
Yeah.
little bit of voter psychology there. But in this year, I feel like it's too crowded, and there are too many that are like based on books. And so I don't know if I don't you're right. I think then it converts to, well, no one actually read these books, and so like we can't really use that as a judge. um but yeah, but who knows? Screenplay does tend to be kind of squirrely, both screenplay
Mm.
categories. So we'll see. All right. So next up is original score. Greg, do you want to do the honors for this one?
I would love to do the honors on this. So, best original score, a category filled with like young composers and an old master. So, we have award nominations for American Fiction, which is Laura Karpman, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. You don't have my sound clip ready. There it is.
I had that ready.
uh,
That's why I wanted you to read
by
them.
by John Williams, of course, who, let's not forget, we heard him conduct that song in the year 2022 in person. And that's an amazing thing that
Insane.
I will go to my grave remembering. Killers of the Flower Moon by Robbie Robertson. Oppenheimer by Ludwig Göransson, also in the Star Wars family. And Poor Things by Yerskin Fendrix. Let's pretend that's how we pronounce that, because I went bold with my J. So Jen, I think this is actually maybe a little bit of a boring one again for us, but who is
Oh,
your
true.
will win?
So it's going to be really hard for it not to be Ludwig Göransson.
Hmm.
The Oppenheimer score is crazy, crazy good, and he's been winning everything. You know, not quite exactly at Davine Joy Randolph levels, but like pretty much. And I think it's just going to be really hard to overtake him at this point. And I think, you know, for American Fiction and Dial of Destiny, it feels like the nomination is the award, kind of. You know what I mean? Like that's you know what I mean? Like that no one was like really thinking that they were going to win. It's more just like out of for John Williams is out of respect, right? And then he's such a
Yeah.
legend. And then I actually went back and listened to the American Fiction because I think on our original reactions show to the nomination morning, I was like, I don't even remember the American Fiction
Mm.
like soundtrack or score, which was unkind at the time. I went back and listened, and then I instantly remembered. I'm like, wait, this is actually really good.
Oh, nice.
It's just a lot of jazz, and which I
Yeah.
enjoy, and actually like fits the theme of the movie really well in terms of because jazz is a form of music that it has had sort of a fraught history of being highbrow and lowbrow at the same time, and like
Yeah.
it started out as like very like lowbrow and like of the African American community during the jazz age, but then now it's sort of seen as like people in sweater vests, like
Yeah.
Jeffrey Wright's character listen to it as like a highfalutin thing. And so yeah, I thought that was it actually made a lot of sense when I went back and thought about it.
Yeah, so again, when we watched it, it's like I forgot to listen to the score. Like when we sat down, I was like, "Gotta listen to the score," and then it got to the credits roll, and there's a nice kind of jazzy song playing. I'm like, "Oh, right, I was supposed to pay attention." And you know, I have trouble rooting for a score that just kind of disappears. I personally need
Hmm.
something kind of big, even though I think there's a case to be made for when a score just doesn't get in the way. Um, so I also went with Ludwig. I think Ludwig is just such a huge talent, and is the next master still on his way up. And I it's not like he's unrecognized at this point. I think he was nominated for at least one of the Creed movies, and he did the first two of those. And like he just really knows how to play in you know different ways. Oh, he won for Black Panther. That's the
Yeah.
history I'm trying to remember. So, Black Panther is incredible and shows his talent in a million ways. And then Oppenheimer shows his talent in a million different ways, right? Like he found a way to match the filmmaker and match the film. And I've been a huge fan of Ludwig's all the way back to the television show Community, where they hired him to come on, and then he hooked up with Childish Gambino and did a bunch of Childish Gambino, aka Donald Glover's early songs. And so, like, he's even name checked in one of Gambino songs. It's
Oh,
like
amazing.
I put in the work, ask Ludwig or something like that. Um, so it's like it's a front runner. It's somebody who has clearly already been established as a major talent, so doesn't need this award, quote unquote, but it's very well deserved. And I have Ludwig for my will win and my should win. With all due respect to John Williams, who I believe turned 92 last week, or the week
Oh
before.
boy,
So it's
amazing.
crazy and it's an amazing career, but I at this point, I think they're just giving him his due credit. There was a time when he said that was going to be his last score. We'll see when the next Spielberg movie gets announced, or I can imagine he might throw in a theme for whatever the next Star Wars movie ends up being, if not a full score. But if this really is the last one he does, I'm glad they gave him the award. It's also a good score. I mean, the Indiana Jones movies, the theme does 90% of the work, but he did a nice
Right.
new theme for Helena, and some good work and some tension. And back to my mom talk. I recently gave her the password to my Movies Anywhere app, and she watched Dial of Destiny, and she reported that she really loved it and thought it was way better than Crystal Skull.
Yay.
So
Oh,
my
that's
work
great.
is done here. So uh, you also had Ludwig for should win, but you were going to throw a little bit of energy towards Robbie Robertson, and I'd love to hear that because I think that is due.
Yeah, so, I often when I'm working or I need something just kind of in the background, I have I pull up a playlist that has all the best score nominees and just kind of cycle through them. And I have to say that the Killers of the Flower Moon score just has so much energy to it and has such a like captures the flavor of like the old west and the time and marries together like sort of kind of the Scorsese rock and roll vibes with sort of
Mm.
the period and in a way that like when if you just told me that on like without me listening to it, I would just be like that makes no sense. Like I don't think that's gonna be good. And it is. So yeah, and it would be it would be a posthumous award. I don't think it's likely. I think Killers of the Flower Moon goes home empty-handed, unfortunately. But I did want to kind of like shine
Ooh.
the spotlight on that because I think it's really good.
I'm definitely tuning into the second half of this episode then to hear some predictions for categories we don't have here. If it's really empty-handed, um, I I think that's right, and I think I there are sequences I remember that my reaction was this music is really cool. I'm having trouble at this remove, kind of identifying where that was or what I think the fire scene stands out. Um, but I will just say, because this might be our only chance to talk about it tonight, Killers of the Flower Moon came on strong and then faded so fast and
Mhm.
so low. And that is a dang shame because there were some articles last week defending Robert De Niro's performance and being like, hey, like, this is one of our best actors doing some of his best work of all time. And I know PT has defended that performance a lot. And that's right. And the film is Scorsese doing Scorsese really well. Like everything really works well in that movie. And I have been frustrated as I start to hear from friends watching it at home on Apple TV. Um, all due respect because they may be listening, but they're like, 3 hours is tough. So I broke it up like a TV show. And I'm like, oh, you didn't get it at all. Like you have to be immersed in it and you have to be enveloped by it. Again, I understand modern life means sometimes you need to break up movies as TV shows and so on. But like the experience of seeing that film was so good and it's become a little bit of a joke. And I'm really sad about that. Make your jokes about
Yeah.
Maestro. Leave Killers alone.
Yes. And I will say that I do want to kind of slightly correct. It is TBD, but I at most Killers of the Flower Moon's going to go home with one award
Yeah, all right.
because you
All
just
right.
reminded
Whew.
me that I was like, oh wait, I was forgetting about one category.
Yeah.
But yes, but still, it's still possible it goes home empty-handed.
Very possible.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right. So next up, we have Best International Feature. I'll read these. We have Io Capitano from Italy, Perfect Days from Japan, Society of the Snow from Spain, The Teacher's Lounge from Germany, and The Zone of Interest. I have only seen 1.25 of these movies. So I'm gonna really be leaning on you for this one, probably. But
uh,
yeah, I mean, what do you think, Greg?
So I want to point a finger out and say if this is if you like Jen have only seen one of these, I think if people have seen one, it's Zone of Interest most likely. I just want to say all five of these, I ranted through this on some previous episode, like these are really good movies and they are incredible. And on a previous episode I quoted director Bong noting that you have to get over the inch at the bottom of the screen and read the subtitles. And I do think it's a blind spot in my own cinema viewing. I have been slow to go to lots of foreign cinema. And to your points earlier, it's also an access thing. You got to be near a small art house theater that gets them. I'm very fortunate that there are 3 in Boston, so most things come through one of them. But these, just to go really quickly, Io Capitano is about some young boys in Africa who want to get to Europe, and it's their journey, kind of hiring people to take them across the entire Sahara and then to get on ship and cross the Mediterranean. And it's incredible and it's harrowing and it speaks to our current moment and has just these grand Lawrence of Arabia / Denis Villeneuve desert vistas built into it. Perfect Days is the I always say this wrong, Wim Wenders
Yeah, that sounds
film
right.
that started its life as a documentary about the public toilets in Japan and how beautiful they are, but became a kind of stirring meditation on modern life. Society of the Snow is the harrowing story of the Bolivian soccer team that crashed in the Andes and the things that all of
Might be
those
Argentine. I'm gonna look up. Keep
it's
talking.
some soccer team crashed in the mountains, and you
It's
know
a
the
rugby
story
team.
because
So you got the whole thing wrong.
it's all off. But you know this story from other places. You know where it goes, and it's a tough watch. You've seen 1/4 of that one, right? And like you get
Yeah.
the flavor very quick, but the fact that it is so harrowing, it felt like it was going to be the 1917 or not the 1970
All Quiet.
the All Quiet this year, and then it just didn't quite get the momentum, I think, because it's such a hard watch. That's one where I bet Netflix sees numbers of a lot of people quitting.
It's a rugby team from Uruguay, and they're
Oh,
flying
so
over the
yeah,
Andes. I think they're going to, but they're going to another South American country.
yeah. This is
Oh,
not a
but
geography
It's
podcast.
Chile.
We're
Yeah, I
back.
know, right? It's like, don't add us. We're
uh,
English teachers. Like, so
and
yeah, for me, it was like what I saw was really impressive, and from a filmmaking perspective, and the effects in the initial plane crash and the drama of it, like it does the sort of like chaos and disaster and trauma is happening everywhere, and it's just like wherever everywhere the camera goes there's something crazy terrible happening. So I remember it did that really well, but then I just like it's my fault. I chickened out. I was just like, I know
mm,
what's coming. I
yeah,
just sat
yeah.
through this like harrowing plane crash, and I know what the second half of this movie is probably about, and I don't know if I want to watch it. And like that's probably not fair, but I was like, I'll just watch it when I'm in more of a mindset to be accepting of that, and then I just never went back to it. So it's still on the list. Technically, I have a week before to finish it. We'll see what happens. PT's excuse was like, we recently were traveling for a conference, and he was like, "Well, I'm flying, so I'm not going to watch Society of the Snow until after we get
Mm.
home."
Let's see. Teacher's Lounge is about a young teacher in a German school and really deeply unsettled me with all the ways our profession can go wrong, but it's really, really watchable. And then here it comes the zone of interest. And because of its categorization and so on, I have it down for will win and should win, and I have no qualms about that. I mean,
Mhm.
people can return to that episode where we just broke that down, the three of us, and it's just absolutely incredible as a piece of art and as a challenging work. And so, the fact that it, is kind of, if Anatomy of a Fall was in this category, I think we'd have a different conversation. But it's so clear to me that this has so much love. It's not going to win Best Picture. It's not going to really compete on director, I don't think. So I think here is the moment where you give it its due, and I'm absolutely fine with that. What do you think,
Yeah,
Jen?
and in terms of predictions, this is pretty easy because anytime an international feature nominee, it also has a Best Picture nominee. I don't think there's ever been a year that it has not won Best International Feature. You know that's like a they're tied together, like that statistic holds. So I feel like it's pretty safe to predict Zone of Interest. And like I don't want to say if it should win necessarily because I haven't seen so many of these other movies that I really want to see. But I also was totally blown away by it. So I think I have no qualms with it taking home the Oscar for sure. Society of the Snow's on Netflix. Are all of these other movies in theaters? I didn't catch if you said that one way or the other.
Yeah, yes, or they were in theaters. A lot of them
Right.
had very limited runs. I think Io Capitano and Teachers Lounge got a week around me, and I saw I got my Teachers Lounge ticket, and I was in the smallest theater, so like 10 seats, and I think there were four of us in it, and then the rest of the week it was empty, I think. So they got very limited runs. This is definitely an area where I want to see streaming step up because it's so
Mm-hmm.
much better for these films and for producers to get them onto streaming services faster. And I think the smart thing to do would be to get your nomination and sell it the next morning, like ready to go immediately, or have it,
Yeah,
negotiated out, because a lot of people would sit and watch these, and I imagine if we compared them all, Society of the Snow has probably been seen by way more people, though the Best Picture nomination does help Zone of Interest, obviously.
for sure. All right. So next up we have Best Animated Feature. Greg, do the honors. Who are our nominees?
I'm not going to try all these names, so I'll just go with the title. So, Best
Yeah,
Animated
that's fine.
Feature 2024: The Boy and the Heron, Elemental, Nimona, Robot Dreams, Spider Man Across the Spider Verse. What are you
Nice.
thinking?
So for I have and so this is a two-way race between The Boy and the Heron and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. They've kind of split the precursors.
Mm.
They've kind of both popped up a different like Boy and the Heron won BAFTA, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse I believe won PGA, right? So it's like they kind of both have a couple of big wins on their side. I'm going with The Boy and the Heron just because I feel like if it's really close, Spider-Verse is going to have the sequel factor working against it. It's going to have the part 1, part 2 discourse working against it, and it's going to have the like, well, we can give it for Beyond the Spider-Verse, right? And
Mm.
it already won Into the Spider-Verse already won. So like so I feel like if people are sort of trying to make a tough choice between the two, they're going to see, well, like, what if Miyazaki doesn't make another movie? And this is
Mm.
our only other chance to give him another Oscar, right? Like, so I think that's going to play out. Also, like Boy and the Heron is has a little bit more prestige, is a little less mainstream.
Yep.
Though it did gangbusters at the box office in North America,
Mm.
so like to a lot of people's surprise. So I think there's a lot of love and passion for it, and people are going to see it as kind of like a career cap award, and that'll push it over the edge. But how about you, Greg?
I have it down for will win as well. I have a lot of affection for this film, and I think it was very good. You just mentioned that the box office was so good. I had the thought the other day that Miyazaki really got like a pandemic boost, and because I forget exactly when HBO Max launched, but it launched with the full library of Ghibli
Yes.
movies. And I think a lot of people, I hear a lot of people who worked through the whole MCU while they were stuck in their houses. And I hear a lot of people who worked through all of Miyazaki. And I think that is, for people around our age, it's like there was always affection for the ones you'd seen, but, didn't see them all when they came out, or kind of or learned in the early 2000s that this is a cool creator who did things, or whatever the time period is for people. So I do think there's a lot of affection for it. I also think it's well deserved. Similarly to other things, like I found it challenging and hard, and I really like that in my Oscar movies. I don't just want to be kind of relaxed and escape into them. So I think it should win, and I'm perfectly happy with that, especially if it really is his last one. I don't think it's his last one. Uh,
It
so
could be
uh,
though.
it could be. It definitely could be. So I'm gonna my should win. Then I went. I put Spider Verse into should win, and this film blew me away, and it has faded in the popular imagination and shouldn't, because it is not at all the kind of cash grab sequel that makes up the animated landscape. Um, we are speaking in the week of the arrival of Kung Fu Panda 4. Who needed 4 Kung Fu Pandas plus like 7 TV shows, I think, along the way, and so on. And like, I think by nature of modern parenthood, you get sucked into a lot of these like lesser animated versions of something big. DreamWorks is notorious in our house for this, because Henry saw Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and it was awesome, and it was totally great. And so he watched a Puss in Boots animated show on Netflix, and it was terrible. It was like they stopped animating it halfway through, and Puss's feet would be off screen so that his torso could just move like a stick figure across, like glide across the screen. And so I think it's so easy to do a cash grab sequel in animated, and this didn't. This blew me away. And we've talked before about Spider-Punk being animated differently in every frame and people's movements being changed. I think Lord and Miller have done the most to kind of jumpstart a new age of animation. And while Spider-Verse was recognized, the Mitchells versus the Machine was kind of ignored, and I fear Spider-Verse could get ignored. And I think if we're going to look back at what animation is 10 years from now, we'll see this kind of
Mm-hmm.
moment and that group of creative people as the moment it started. So with all due respect to Miyazaki, I'm going with Spider-Verse should win this.
No, and I totally respect that. And it was a hard choice. I love both movies, and for all the reasons you said. And it's interesting because I feel like this is a crossroads of like how international has the Academy gone. Because if
Mm.
it's gone as international as some people say it has, then I feel like it's Boy and the Heron. But I think if it's a lot of North American animators who are putting in their votes, then you're right. Across the Spider-Verse, so revolutionary in terms of the animation style and what is possible in animation, just from an artistic perspective. That I think that's definitely pulling it in its favor. The fact that it's here, even though it's a sequel, it's nominated, even though it's a sequel, I think speaks a lot on its behalf. So Yes, I think I'll be happy either way. I will be a little sad for Miyazaki if like he never ends up making another movie. And this movie, and we have other episodes where we are reviewing both The Boy and the Heron, an episode for that and an episode for Across the Spider-Verse. So if you are interested in both of those films, go back and check in our back catalog for those. But yeah, I think what I said on our Boy and the Heron review was that this feels like the synthesis of so many of Miyazaki's past works, and it has that kind of capstone feel to it that I think this would make a lot of sense to be his second Oscar.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, like, I would be okay. Obviously, part of me is like, I just want more Miyazaki. But if this is his last film, I am okay. I think it's a good one to end on. So,
Hmm.
all right. Now we get
Go to Shorts
into the
Land.
really, really dicey categories. We got Best Animated Short Film. So we've got Letter to a Pig, 95 Senses, Our Uniform, Pachyderm, War is Over, inspired by the music of John and Yoko. Yes, that is the entire title of the short. The title is longer than the longer than probably the film is itself. Oh, so animated was interesting. It's pretty locked down in terms of like none of these were in full were available to stream. I tried,
Interesting.
and so I've seen the trailers for all of these, and one was an extended trailer for the John and Yoko one, and I'm like, isn't this basically the whole movie? Like, like how long could this possibly be? I've seen 10 minutes of it now. Like, it's a short, isn't it? But so I'm mostly for these shorts categories just going on the sort of the buzz from other pundits that I've listened to and looking up at people's predictions lists elsewhere. But you've actually seen all of these, right?
Yes. And so for these categories, my will win is my best guess at like which one fits kind of how these categories usually go. Whereas should win, I'm more endorsing like the one I thought was coolest or most fun. But this is much more personal taste than any of my other predictions have been. And I'm relying on you to tell me. I will start by saying for this one, the one you have marked down as the front runner, I am actively angry about because it is
I know.
so bad. It is so bad. So I'll start with the good news, and then you can tell me how this is somehow the leader. So again, all worth your time. And usually the set of shorts does become available on iTunes. I'll check next time Jen's talking if it's out yet. But oftentimes you can pay like $3 and stream them all, or $6 or something. So it again may be after the ceremony, but they're all worth seeing, and I would recommend doing that if you need a good night of entertainment. So I went with 95 Senses. Shout out to Tim Blake Nelson, who narrates this one, and got a shout out on our Dune pod just mere hours/minutes ago. I think we've only ever recorded podcasts. We don't have any breaks in between. And this is a really cool short, and the reason it's really cool, I cannot reveal, but it is a narrator who is Tim Blake Nelson walking through kind of his 5 senses and then alluding to the other 95 maybe we have. And as the I'm being so careful right now. As the short goes
I mean,
on,
I read
go
the
ahead.
premise of this, like the log line, and it spoils what I think you're not trying to spoil. So
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know.
All right. Well, so
I mean,
I will
we
say
can not spoil it if you want to.
we'll go ahead and spoil it. So he starts narrating and talks about like senses and the things he loves with his senses. And as it goes on, you realize that it is a convict on death row as he starts to think about the end of his life. And it is kind of shocking how it makes that turn in the middle, because it feels like a kind of light poetic, and it has this real kind of heavy message to it, and it's really well done, and the animation is really beautiful and clear. So that is that's where I'm putting in on my Oscar ballot. I cannot endorse these as absolutely will win. You probably, if you're trying to win your pool, you probably got to go with Jen's pick. My should win, I always put in should win the coolest animation, and Our Uniform was a kind of animation I'd never seen before, where it's kind of like clothing arranged on a flat surface and then drawings on them. So like if a character is wearing jeans, it's like the character is drawn on top of the jeans, and maybe the jeans shift and then become the next character's headscarf or something like that. And it's a story of uh, Pakistani, I think it's fair to say, girls reflecting on wearing headscarves at their private school in Pakistan. And so both subject matter, but more for animation style. It's just really cool. And that's the one I would pick if I had to say what should win. All right, Jen, break my heart.
Nice. I know. Sorry. So, first of all, I do want to agree. I saw the trailer for Our Uniform and was instantly sort of like, "Oh, this is such a cool mix of sort of like live action and with animation over it." Because the text, like the textures and the textiles and whatnot. So, I'm that one I'll probably definitely seek out, even if it's after the Oscars. Uh, so yes. My will win is War is Over, inspired by the
Ooh.
music of John and Yoko. It's so the premise of this one is that there's a war going on, and two men on either side of the conflict via messenger pigeon are playing a chess game. So the pigeon, my understanding is the pigeon is literally carrying the messages of what the next chess move is across the battlefield to the other soldier, right? And then it's like, so I guess because these are shorts, like trailers give away everything, because the ending, I was like, oh, that I'm pretty sure I know what happens. I won't spoil it in case someone watches it. Like
No,
that
I
wasn't
will.
so for 90 for 95 senses, the tagline was like a death row inmate talks about his senses. And I was like, oh, I
Okay.
guess I know what, so I think
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
safe
yeah.
talking about that. But War is Over, the ending of that, and like, I think you can predict if you just know like just based on the premise what
You see
happens.
the
But
title.
like,
It's so bad. So the fighting goes on, and then the two armies start attacking each other, and the two men who have been playing chess end up kind of squaring off with guns pointed. And at that moment, the message of one of the moves falls out of the pocket of one of them, and they realize, like, oh my god, it's you, like, oh, and then the message is received by the generals that the war is over and they should stop fighting. And it is, as the title says, inspired by the music of John and Yoko. And why not the worst possible choice for that, which is, so this is Christmas and what have you done, right? And it's like, what is happening? It's so, and I'm not an expert on that music, but war is over if you let it, I think is the lyric in that song, which I've heard at Christmas time forever and so on. But it's like, um, yeah, and it's just so, like, on the surface cheesy. It's like, let's do the most simple message with this song, and it is produced by Yoko. I think their child is involved in some way, so it's like a huge vanity project. Like, people aren't celebrating John enough. Let's remember him again. And it's, yeah, I was not a fan. And I believe that was the last of the ones. And I turned to my friend Ben and I'm just like, no, like, why is this happening? So if that wins, listen for my cries of pain from Cambridge, Massachusetts.
sorry. So I mean, it wasn't a sure thing. So I was listening to Next Best Picture because they're the only ones who have their, as far as I know, have their predictions episode out already. And I was listening to them talk about the shorts, and they were having a similar conversation to us, where I like, some people had my position where I was like, I think the John and Yoko one's going to win, because people are just going to see their names on the literal title and be like, oh, I love the Beatles, great, seems good. And and I believe the phrase they use over and over again on next best picture was name check. People are just going to name check John and Yoko
Yeah.
and be like, great, it sounds good. And they had someone on there, I think it was Daniel Howitt, who they had to be like, "Oh, you're being so cute. Like, it would be nice if 95 cents is one, but it's not happening." So, like, sorry to crush your dreams,
Oh, yeah.
Greg. But I think they were like, it's possible, but and so, like, I think it was definitely between those. There was like a back and forth between those two. Um, so you could be right. We'll see. I'm just choosing to be more cynical and assuming that if people haven't watched these, they're just gonna look at the titles, as so often happens. That's how we ended up with a My Year of Dicks. as the winner.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Forgot about that
but
one.
that short actually was good, but like, but
It was.
that's probably that's not why it won probably. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm going with. But again, I haven't actually watched all of these in full, but I definitely got the sense of like, oh, I know exactly what this War is Over one is trying to do, and like, oh,
Yeah.
but it's got a cute
Yeah.
pigeon, so, um,
Yeah, it's the animation style is like knockoff Pixar. It's like
yeah.
kind of very slightly stylized computer animation. So that's why it also kind of stands out because you're like, oh, the others had such cool, weird, interesting things, and then this is kind of just what we can get done on a budget to praise Yoko.
I hope you're right. Let's just say that. And I'm notorious, like oftentimes the shorts are the thing that torpedo my Oscar score, because
Mm,
if I don't, I'm not on the quite the right wavelength that year, and then I'm like suddenly I'm down 3 points, and I'm like, no, what have I done?
yeah.
But yeah, all right. Next we've got documentary feature.
So, documentary feature, it's Bobby Wine, the people's president, The Eternal Memory, Four Daughters, To Kill a Tiger, and 20 Days in Mariupol. I will just say these five movies are harrowing. Taking them
Oh,
in order, they are political corruption, the cruelty of Alzheimer's, the rights of women, and terrorist exploitation, uh, trying to get a rapist convicted in India, and the first 20 days of a war and the brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine. It is a rough sit. So, all of them are excellently done. There's some things here I've never seen before, and I will always remember. But these are not a fun night out at the movies. And so I'll pass it to you, and I will just say, as I do so, Bobby Wine is available on Disney Plus if you want it. The Eternal Memory is on Paramount Plus because it's actually an MTV produced documentary. Uh, Four Daughters is on a few services. It's kind of like on the Canopy, maybe some
hmm.
weird extensions on Prime type thing. To Kill a Tiger, maybe you have to have a VPN in Canadian YouTube. And 20 Days in Mariupol is produced by PBS Frontline and is just available for free on the PBS website. So
Wow,
these are pretty accessible if people want to see them, but
wow.
they are tough sits. Jen, what
So
do you think will win this category?
well, first I want to say I feel extra bad now that I haven't seen a single one of these. Usually I'm okay. Doc feature is my weakest category, typically in terms of how many I've seen. I usually have seen by now one or two, and I have seen zero of these. But now that you're saying that they're all streaming, I have no excuse. It's shameful. Hopefully, I can see them this week. But yeah, it's generally the consensus. It's not particularly contentious. 20 Days in Mariupol. It has won most of the, if not all of the precursors. I think it won the biggest one fairly recently. It won PGA for best doc. And I just won a bunch of things. So I have not heard any contenders or any kind of theories as to another possible spoiler in this category. I suppose that it is possible. Documentary feature does sometimes get weird. But yeah, I would say 20 Days in Maripol is a pretty safe bet at this point. I see you have it as
Yeah.
well. So
Yep, it's my will win and my should win. Like Navalny last year, I think the Oscars really likes to use this category to point to a political issue that is really
mhm.
important, and the war in the Ukraine could not be more deserving of the spotlight right now. And the filmmaking is incredible because it is a very famous war photographer camped out in the city of Mariupol. And part of the action is how they have to work so hard just to get the footage out of Mariupol to get it.
Oh
And
wow.
essentially, for those first 20 days, and it is basically only at the 20th day they finally get a full rack of footage out. Um, at that, anything you saw on the news those at that point is this one camera crew because they were there and seeing the victims, and it is really really tough to watch. There are lots of warnings at the top of the dock. There is a sequence wherein a an attack hits a maternity ward in a hospital, which is incredibly dark and upsetting, and the kind of thing you want to look away from, but you end up feeling it's your duty to watch, and it kind
Mm,
of is. And it made me very, very angry at the political shenanigans going on in Washington that are preventing us from sending just bullets to the army doing the fighting that desperately needs it. So I think Oscar voters are going to be motivated like me and just give their vote this way. I did put it for my should win because it is just the most incredible of these. I just will put in a plug for the Eternal Memory, which is the one that's about Alzheimer's. So it's a very well known celebrity from a different South American nation, which I'm forgetting. I think Brazil, and his wife, and it's his decline into Alzheimer's. And they let cameras in this incredibly intimate detail
Hmm.
of their lives, and it's really incredible what you get to see. So full disclosure, my stepfather suffered from Alzheimer's. He had a very, very quick decline into Alzheimer's. And there were things that my mother experienced firsthand and I kind of saw the edges of that I didn't really understand. But like
Mm.
there comes a point in Alzheimer's where the person no longer recognizes themselves in the mirror. And in the case of my stepfather and this man in the documentary, gets angry at who's broken in their house because they see themselves in the mirror and get ready to
Oh,
like
yeah.
fight the mirror and so on. And it was just like it was something that was familiar to me, so it had that extra ring to it. But then I was like, I don't think people understand this. They understand the like, oops, I put my car keys in the fridge of Alzheimer's, which is such an early stage of that disease. And the later stages are usually kept really private. So if that at all sounds interesting to you, it's a tough watch. They filmed it. They clearly started well before the pandemic and then filmed through the pandemic. So it's really interesting just how they got it all done. So, but heavy.
All right. Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, but sounds really really amazing as a documentary. So yeah, I'll have to check that out. All right. So next we have documentary shorts. I have also not seen any of these. But I will read the nominees nonetheless. The ABCs of book banning, The Barber of Little Rock, Island in Between, The Last Repair Shop, and Nine and WIPO. So, Greg, who do you have as the will win for this one?
So this was a tough one to predict in a lot of ways. I will just do what I did before. The ABCs of book banning is on Paramount Plus. The Barber of Little Rock is free on YouTube from the New Yorker. Island in Between is also free on YouTube. I forget whose it is, but it's out there. And then The Last Repair Shop and Nine and WIPO are both available on Disney Plus. They were both purchased by Disney after being created independently. Um, Really, really interesting, good short subjects. I went with Will Win. I'm just guessing Nine and WIPO. It's a documentary about this filmmaker's two grandmas, from his mother's side and his father's side. They just end up living together, and they're these two adorable old ladies who just tell you all the good things left in life when you're in your 90s, and they are adorable, and it's heartwarming, and it's hard, especially after coming off the feature length documentary. It's hard not to just smile and be happy that they're there. The should win, I would say this was tough because these are all really good, but I went with The Last Repair Shop, which is on Disney Plus and is any student in LA who wants to play a musical instrument can get a free musical instrument from the schools. And this is the repair shop that like maintains the 50,000 instruments that the LA public schools are desperately trying to keep in the hands of students. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
kind of a fun little like you can't imagine what the system has to look like to support that. So that's where I went. Again, I wouldn't put money on either of those. I'm very interested to see what you have down as will win.
So, I have the ABCs of book banning as my will win. This is mostly because I think people are against book banning. Like, and that's kind of the main logic. And what's interesting, again, it is a more cynical pick because from what I've heard about it, it's actually not very good as a film. Uh,
Mm.
and that it's just literally like, oh, here's another book, it's getting banned. Oh, here's another book, it's getting like, so it's not really as a form of filmmaking, it's like not really doing anything particularly interesting, but just because of the nature of the topic, people
Mm.
will vote their conscience and sort of be like, I vote this because I am also against book banning. But that's my logic there. But actually, Nine Eye and Waipo is another major contender. Like a lot of pundits have that one as well,
Nice.
because Sean Wang just won at Sundance for Didi, and so and like he had just, it's like he the what they described is that he's having like a moment where like
Nice.
uh he was having a really good couple of months where he like found out that he was nominated for best documentary short at the Oscars, and then he won um best feature to in competition, best US dramatic feature at Sundance, and so like he's just kind of like a hot thing right now. And apparently the grannies are being campaigned. Like, so the
Nice.
reports are that they've been all over the place, and people love them. And so I actually think that there's a good shot for that. If you hadn't already put that down, I might have put that down as my pick.
I did see that they got to do filmed the Granny's live reaction, and that was immediately on the Today Show website. So like it did get around a little bit. The ABCs of book banning is a very simple premise. It is, let's take the books that are getting banned and have a child of the age that's recommended to that book read it and tell us what they think about that book being banned and whether it should be banned or not. And so it isn't like the most groundbreaking, shocking thing, but it's also a very simple way to say these bans are stupid. And anybody who thinks
Mm-hmm.
about them for 2 seconds realizes this is about parents' hangups and the kids are, totally fine with all these materials. And so it also is just a good reminder of like how kind of simple these books that are getting banned are. Like, yes, there are some super controversial ones that contain, but then like, do your kids read ever we call them the big head books? It's like, who was Paul Revere? And it's a picture of Paul Revere and his head's big. There's like, who was
Oh.
Harriet Tubman has been banned. And it's like, what? Like, just because there's a black lady on the
Oh.
cover, you've banned the book. So it is a good reminder that issue did not go away, even if it got kind of
Mm-hmm.
pushed out of the spotlight. So, um, great. All right. The last of the short categories. So best live action short film, a category which we have also reviewed one of the nominees in, which is unusual, considering
It's probably the
this.
only time that'll ever happen.
So that the
Yes.
nominees are The After, Invincible, Night of Fortune, Red, White, and Blue, and The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. I think only Henry Sugar is available widely. Um, Gosh, now I'm struggling to remember what all these are. Invincible is about a little boy who's in juvenile detention and what his life is like trying to survive that. Night of Fortune is about a man dealing with the grief of losing his wife. Red, White, and Blue is a parable about the current situation in America related to abortion. And then The Wonderful Life of Henry Sugar is about a fanciful tale of a man who learns how to gamble well. So that's what kind of doesn't fit in necessarily. I'm trying to look up again what The After was because I totally forgot. Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's the
The
yeah. I
The
saw that
After
one.
is
So
about a man who loses his wife and child as well. So
it's
a
tough.
real downer of a night, as I said. Get the 2 beers before you go back for the live action shorts. What did you think of The After since you saw that one?
So yeah, that one's on Netflix, so that was pretty easy for me to see. It felt, I mean, it was devastating, and it's got David
Oh, Yellow Wolf.
Oyelowo. I hope I'm saying
Yeah.
what did
Agent
I,
Callus
did you say?
himself for Star Wars
Yeah.
fans, David
Yes,
Oyelowo.
yes. Like and he's amazing in it. He's the main character, but it did feel really emotionally manipulative. And
Hmm.
I often feel this way about various shorts, like the really heavy hitting, hugely tragic shorts. I believe there was one a couple years ago about a school shooting that I cried my eyes out during, but also was like, I hate you at the end for making me do that. You know what I mean? Like, and there are movies that are like important for that reason, but at the same time, because and it's a function that they are shorts, right? Like I think it's like they
Yeah.
have to cram so much emotion into such a short amount of time that I just felt at the end of this like I was glued to it the whole time I watched it, and it's just gut wrenching and devastating. And so, and then you think about like, well, what if the events of this film had happened to me? And it's just like, oh my gosh. Uh, but then by the end, I was like, I feel played. I feel like I've been played
Yeah.
by this
Yeah.
movie. So I kind of was mixed on it. What did you think?
Yeah, I had all those same thoughts. Plus, I was just in London last summer, and I'm 95% sure I walked on that bridge that the climactic scene
Oh no.
happens at, because I took a walk one afternoon. My wife wanted to rest a little, and I was like, I'm in London. I'll just, and I walked down the Thames, and a climactic scene happens on kind of the sidewalk on the edge of the Thames. Um, it was a really good performance, and I thought it had this nice way of saying like, hey, you know how you don't treat your Uber driver like he's a human being? Guess what? He's a human being, and that's
Yeah.
a little bit of a message we could use a little more of. So my will win, I went with Henry Sugar. I still have as much, I mean, it's on record that I'm a giant Wes Anderson fan. I don't necessarily like that he's here. I think these categories should be for filmmakers on their way up more than celebrated artists. And that this will be potentially his first Oscar is a little to me,
So crazy.
but then I think about that short, and like it is by far the best made, the most interesting, the most like star-studded. A
Longest by
good
quite a bit.
Yeah, a good indicator is usually the stars in, like, if there's a recognizable star in one of the shorts, it usually is that, like the Riz Ahmed one, and there was one
Hmm.
a few years ago that just had the Piper's sister from Orange Is the New Black, but it was like that level of fame was enough that it was like, ooh, they got a star. And so there's a lot this year that have kind of movie stars. I mean, David Oyelowo certainly is a movie star, but you've got Benedict, you've got Dev Patel, you've got Sir Ben Kingsley. It's just a crazy good cast, and
Hmm.
it's beautiful. So I can't deny it. That's my probably will win.
Yeah, and like I may still put that as my will win. I put something else in our doc because partly just wanted to offer another alternative, but also like I think the discourse is like, well, obviously Wes Anderson should win, right?
Mm.
And I'm like, are we over like am I overthinking that by being like, well, maybe he won't win because he's like you said, sort of like too big for this category? Like people are gonna be like, well, like he's Wes Anderson. He doesn't need me to give him an
Yeah,
Oscar,
yeah,
even though he does. You know what I mean? Like, and they might be like, well, that we should give the Oscar in this category to one of the actual smaller short films to up and coming
yeah, yeah.
filmmakers. I can definitely see that voter psychology coming into it, and regardless of how much they like Henry Sugar, um, but at the same time, it's it's equally cynical to be like, well, people are just gonna see Wes Anderson's name and be like, oh yeah, like he's the best,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and not even think about whether or not we've given him an Oscar already or anything like that. You know what I mean? And so yes, and so interesting stat that I heard on Next Best Picture: if he wins, Wes Anderson will be the first first to be nominated for a short film category after being nominated for Best Director.
Oh, wow.
And the only, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like there's nobody
Yeah,
else who's
yeah.
had that trajectory because it's so bizarre. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'm
We
of two minds. It's like the chalk pick here is Henry Sugar because he's the most famous. He's the biggest filmmaker. It like does, like you said, sticks out in terms of its production value, and like in every way, it is like superior to a lot of these films in terms of just production value and stuff like that. But I don't know.
I was just gonna say it's interesting that we had the conversation last Monday night on Maestro about how Bradley Cooper is like desperate to win an Oscar. And it's like, if you look from a distance, this could feel like Wes Anderson is desperate to win an Oscar, so goes a kind of zags to just grab this category. It feels like that's not how this got created, though. That he
Hmm.
wanted to adapt these short stories, tried to figure out a way to make them all into one film, and realized that wasn't going to work. We rehashed this in our episode about them back in October, which is a great episode, and you should check it out. Now available on YouTube. And you should see like our thoughts on that. But I really think this came down to like, well, these required these shorter run times, and that made us eligible. And it's Netflix, and they want whatever Oscars they can get, so they've pushed it and campaigned it. I just don't think Wes Anderson cares if he gets this Oscar or not at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day.
I'm going with Red, White, and Blue,
Mm.
which is the film you mentioned about reproductive rights, and it's like I did watch this one. So I've out
Oh,
of
good.
all of these, I watched The After. I managed to watch Red, White, and Blue, partly because I knew I was going to be picking it for this category. So I was like, I should see it
Mm.
before saying if I can see it, I should. Obviously, I've seen Henry Sugar. So Red, White, and Blue actually like it seemed like it was like more of like a direct. Like I paid $1.99 on some website, and then I could watch it.
Mm.
And I
Nice.
I think it was via VHX maybe. So it's available to rent, but it looks like it's kind of like through the production company or through some other sort of like indie kind of venue. And so that you can I just googled and found that that was available. But it is like this one almost is like The After in terms of like it's so obvious in how it's trying to get this message across and kind of play to your emotions, but in a way that I think will work for a lot of people because they feel so strongly about the issue itself. You know what I mean? Like I think regardless like how I would evaluate this in terms of its potential for political influence is very different than how I would evaluate it just purely as a short film, because just purely as a short film I have a lot of notes, um, but
Yeah.
in terms of the power of it in terms of impacting people about this issue, and I don't want to say too much about that because I think it will spoil some of it, but it's like a very powerful story. And even if it's like very simply told and very obviously told, it's still powerful. And so like for that reason, I feel like anyone who has manages to see it, it's going to kind of haunt them in a way that's going to, I think, could push it ahead of Henry Sugar. Cause like, and it's just so crazy that I'm comparing those two films anyway.
Yeah.
But like,
That's a huge leap. Yeah, so a couple of things working in this one's favor. I think, like we said, where Mariupol might get it for documentary to bring attention. I think this is a huge issue in our country. I just assigned my students research papers, and so many picked reproductive rights as their topic. And there was a time when I stopped allowing that because it felt like it was a done issue and there's no sense yelling about it anymore. But that's not where we're at anymore. So
right.
certainly open. You're right that it does manage to do something a little surprising, and I will leave it vague as well. It has a twist to it that I did not see coming, and was very effective. But it reminds me of how Barbie got charged with being feminism 101. This is reproductive rights 101. And it's like, if you've thought about this issue at all, you've thought about everything that this film has to say. But there are a lot of people who haven't thought about reproductive rights enough or thought about the implication of some of the law changes going into place. And that is worth telling. And I was shocked when the credits rolled. Samantha Bee is a producer on this one,
Oh.
using some of that TBS money, I think, to kind of give back to causes she cares about.
All right.
And it stars
It
Brittany
does star.
Snow.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna
Well,
say.
and Brittany Snow is most famous for being my birthday buddy. She was the most famous celebrity born on my birthday until Oscar Isaac got famous, and now we both
I
have
was gonna
to
say,
just
how
be
many
in his
birthday buddies
shadow.
do you have?
Yeah, that's it. Those are the only two I know of. So it's
Okay,
always
okay.
Oscar Isaac now. So
I know her
yeah,
from the Pitch Perfect movies, right? What else is she in?
she got famous on American Dreams, which was like a TV show that was like
Oh,
Dick Clark, American Bandstand teenagers. Um, and then she was most recently, she had a standout role in X, the first of those movies. There's X, and then there's Pearl, and she's in the first of those, and there's a third one coming,
oh,
which those are also tough watches, but for totally different reasons. But yes, so she's had a little bit of a career moment lately. I really don't mean to denigrate her, but I mean, neither of us are Oscar Isaac. As my wife tells me all the time, you're no Oscar Isaac. So that's just how it is. Would be worthy, even if I think it's a little obvious. So, all right, let's get back to some things that people probably are more interested in.
so we're at Best Director. Nominees are Justine Triet for Anatomy of a Fall, Martin Scorsese for Killers of the Flower Moon, Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things, and Jonathan Glazer for The Zone of Interest. Greg, who do you think is good? I mean, again, we're back to like this is very predictable. Now I'm getting
Yeah.
paranoid. I'm like, what am I missing? What upset am I missing right now? But yeah, I don't think it's this one. What do you have for your will win?
I have Christopher Nolan. I think it's a
Yeah.
very safe bet. I think he saved movies last year with Greta Gerwig, but it feels like this is a done deal. He's won so many of the precursors, and I think I go back to I think he's going to miss on screenplay, so they want to reward him somewhere. It will be here, and then they don't need to give him adapted screenplay. Um, Completely agree with you where it's like it starts to feel like is this really just it because it's so predictable. And my intention, because we are on Monday night before the ceremony as we record, I kind of set my movie watching agenda this week. I'm like, the one I want to make sure I rewatch before Sunday is Oppenheimer, because I haven't seen it since that opening night in July, and I'd really like to
Whoa.
return to it and kind of remind myself why it's so good. And I think at the moment I'm a little. It's not that I look. I'm not Antonio. I do think Oppenheimer has some redeeming qualities, but I do think because it's been so inevitable, I've started to kind of just be like, shruggy, right? Like it's just not that exciting to me. Um, so I'll throw it to you, I guess, for your will win. Go for it.
So I still say Nolan. I'm trying to even think of like who is surprising here. It's probably either Justine Triet or Jonathan Glazer, because I
Hmm.
feel like those are the two the sort of sleeper international picks that have sort of done pretty well all award season here and there. So if we're not seeing something coming, I feel like it's probably one of those. Even though people sort of say Poor Things is what's in second place right now, in terms of like, but like overall, like I guess I'm
I
spoiling our next
Yeah.
conversation, but I don't know. Yeah.
My feelings on Poor Things have been well documented, but I do just have the general sense it's fading. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
did just hit streaming or is about to hit streaming this week.
It's about
I
to
think,
like this week.
yeah.
Again, I don't
So
understand the timing, but
I and maybe it was on like VOD last week because there was a little uptick in the where it sat on the most popular on Letterbox, and usually that means a new
oh,
release. And I note that just to say, I think Yorgos has faded out of this conversation entirely. I agree with you. I put down for should win, and we'll put in second place Trier. I suspect you might have a different Trier conversation next week, or next episode. But I feel like the achievement of Anatomy of a Fall is so good and such a singular vision that I would really like to see her rewarded here. Uh, as was established, I went and saw Tenet last week. I am a big fan of a lot of Christopher Nolan movies. I think he's very well established and he has a career that deserves this award. But I don't know if I really want him to get it at the end of the day. I'd kind of like to see Trier sneak it away. But
yeah.
I'm not going to be
I mean,
upset if it's him.
yeah, I wouldn't be mad about that. I ended up putting I went back and forth a lot about on this. I ended up putting Nolan as my should win as well. Again, it's I've so this is third thing I've been coming back to with every Oppenheimer dominated category is I'm like, but it's good. It's good. It's really good. It's in this position for a reason, and oftentimes things that are the front runner are things that we don't think are our favorites. And this is a year where every nominee is so great that I just some are greater than others. I would, as we've already established on previous episodes, but I'm not. I feel like Nolan deserves this, and because Oppenheimer is such an achievement. There's a reason it's the front runner in so many categories, right? The several acting categories, a bunch of technical categories. Is probably gonna, I'm stepping on next episode a little bit, but like it's a strong contender in a lot of different places, and that's not possible unless you have a great director at the helm, right? And like again, you said singular vision for Justine Triet. I absolutely agree with that, but you could also easily say that for Nolan. And Oppenheimer is just such a bigger, louder cinema with a capital C movie, right? And it is kind of this amazing cross between a historical drama biopic and a blockbuster. And so, like, I feel like, are we going to see another film exactly like that soon, right? Or anytime soon? that quite has all of those elements kind of working so well together, right? You know what I mean? So that's sort of why I go with Nolan. And I liked, like you said, I've liked a lot of his films for a long time, and this feels right to give him an Oscar at this time.
Yeah, yeah. And even though he's the presumptive frontrunner in a million ways, I think he's acted with good humility and been the kind of aw shucks guy when he needs to be. And that's important when you're that presumptive for so long. And so I think it fits. And we've already referenced it a few times this week. The Denis Villeneuve, Christopher Nolan buddy act is
Yes.
so good, and it is really good. I think I crunched the end of our episode of what it would have happened if Dune 2 came out last year, but they would have been going head to head and it would have been brutal. So it's good that the way it turns out,
Yes.
Villeneuve can really support Nolan this year and then switch it to next year, we presume. So
I
it
agree.
sounds like we should get to the last award, which Jen did tell everybody at the beginning. Both of our prediction episodes are getting a crack at this, just so everybody gets to say their vote. You, dear listener, can determine whether Jen changes her mind between Monday and Wednesday of Oscar week.
Which I
We
reserve the
shall
right to
see.
do until the minute the broadcast starts. I am allowed to change my mind.
I definitely changed my ballot sitting in the movie theater seat last year, and I intend to be open to that again. So, in Best Picture, we have a full 10 nominees. They are American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, and Past Lives. Uh, Jen, it's such a mystery because we definitely haven't hinted at all to it. What do you think
I
will
know.
win?
This is like, yeah, the Oscars, while making me happy because I'm not mad about any of the things that are probably going to win, it is making it harder to podcast about because there's less
True.
tension and uncertainty. But yes, it's Oppenheimer all day. We've been asking over and over again all season, is it still going to be Oppenheimer? Can it be stopped? At what point are we going to like switch to another movie? Is going to be the front runners? What is going to surge at the last minute? And it just hasn't happened, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Nothing has stopped it. Nothing has slowed it. Even it's just keeps winning and winning and winning. And they're just generally, so if we think about, and if you want to know more about how Oscar voting works, especially for Best Picture, which I have done a poor job of explaining in the past, you can listen to the you can listen to the Big Picture's recent episode. They interviewed someone whose job it was to run all the voting at the Oscars. And the way that they explained it was, since there are so many nominees, and this year so many good nominees, right? There are 10 nominees. It's twice as much as all the other categories. That there's more chance for, they just count up all the votes, that the winner technically will have such a low percentage compared to the rest. And so they wanted to change the voting to a ranked voting system because they wanted to represent more people in the academy, right? They wanted the winner to represent more votes. And so then they do this crazy thing where they like knock out the bottom and switch those votes to the number 2 choice, and then funnel those in and kind of keep doing that cycle, rinse and repeat, until one of the nominees gets to over 50%. I don't even think that's gonna be a problem. I feel like Oppenheimer is a lot of people's number one, and it's
Yep,
just
I
gonna
think
take
that's
it
right.
away. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even think we need to go to a runoff or whatever. Um, but even still, even if that's not true, maybe some people at this point are like so jaded. They're like, Oppenheimer, what's the big deal about Oppenheimer? We've been talking
Mm,
about it for 5 months, right? Which I could definitely understand. It's like fatigue and like, oh, is this still really the front runner? Are we still really talking about Oppenheimer only? And like you said, there could be some Barbie love. There's a lot of movies on here that people are really passionate about. But I feel like even if Oppenheimer's not your number one, it's probably your number 2 or 3, and then
yep.
that's where it like can't be stopped. You know what I mean? So I don't know, like what could even surprise at this point? Because the other thing too is, and again I referred to this earlier, my Charlie Day meme, like looking at the strings, how they all fit together in a crazed way. This happens to me every year. You have to do your Oscars puzzle, and Oppenheimer's just predicted to win in too many categories for it not to be Best Picture. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, dude, the math has to add up. And I
Yeah,
don't know how to
yeah.
do the math in a way that adds up to another movie for Best Picture.
Well, and I will go ahead and say that was my pick for will win. It seems very obvious. That's what I told my mom. And I really started to think about should win, and it is a really interesting question to me. And I think everybody has different criteria for best picture. But I don't go with my personal favorite should win Best Picture because I think Best Picture has to represent something a little more. And this is where I'm a little cheesy and I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. But like, I want a Best Picture nominee that when you put it in the list, you say there's something about that film that really makes you remember that year. And I'm, currently one of my movie projects is working through all the Best Picture nominees, and you see this, right? You get around World War II and you see films that represent the anxieties. And then you get to the 70s and you see the arrival of the new filmmakers, and that matters and is interesting. And then you get on and on and on. And so I always want something that isn't just like this is a good movie, but it speaks to our moment in another way. And so when I got down to my should win, I left it with a bunch of question marks because as much as it can be frustrating that it's so predictable that it's Oppenheimer, I have trouble seeing any movie on this list that better represents the year we've had at movies and that represents what our culture is thinking about, our anxieties, our values. I feel like that's just Oppenheimer. And so, again, personal favorite on the list is probably American Fiction, but Past Lives is up there. And
Hmm.
I think we said this nomination morning, or whoever was on that show said it. There is not a bad movie on this list. And we did our best to find redeeming qualities in Maestro. And again, Maestro is not a bad movie. It might be our 10th favorite on this list, but that's incredible. There is not a green book on this list. There are not anything that's like embarrassing or anything like that. So if you can't do the full Oscar death race, I think a lot of people do I'm seeing all the best picture. I have a couple friends who do that and quit on Maestro this year. But, I strongly recommend any of these movies. You got to be in the mood for some of them, but they all work really, really well. And so it will be Oppenheimer. And I think that's great and that's wonderful. And I'm looking forward to revisiting it soon because I do think it's a great movie.
I don't have any problem with Oppenheimer winning, to being consistent with what I've said for many of the categories we've had on this episode. It's the front runner for a reason. We should celebrate that. We don't have to zag just because it's the presumed winner. But that said, I feel like if I'm filling out my ballot, I'm probably having a hard time whether or not Past Lives or Oppenheimer is my number one, and that's a tough decision just because they're like the opposite of the movie spectrum in terms of like tone and style and like type of movie. Past Lives is such a smaller movie, which I think ultimately is why it didn't actually end up getting a lot of nominations. I'm so glad it ended up in Best Picture. That was our Best Picture for the Letters Awards.
Yeah.
Obviously. But yeah, Past Lives, Anatomy of a Fall, I'd be super happy if either of those snuck in to get Best Picture. I don't think it will. But yeah, I have a hard time. I'm not upset if any of these win Best Picture over an Oppenheimer, with maybe the exception of Maestro, because I'd be like, what are we doing? But other than that, yeah, I'd be pretty happy. Like, so, and they're so different. It's like there's such variety represented on this list as well. It's like such such different. Like compare like Anatomy of a Fall to Barbie, right? They're next to each other alphabetically on this list. Like, the tone and style of those movies could not be more different. It's crazy, and yet they're both great movies. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, it's the yay movies. It's sort of the
Well,
I think the general takeaway from this. Yeah,
that's what a list of 10 should be. Like, let's give you the widest swath of what movies were this year. And I think they nailed it this year. And I'm excited to see going forward that they hopefully keep doing this. I realized that when I listed them, Poor Things and The Zone of Interest had slipped onto the next page. So I only listed 8. So Poor Things and Zone of Interest are also nominated, of course.
it's conspiracy. You just don't like Poor Things. You wanted it to be disappeared from.
But I do really like Zone. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Okay. Fair. Okay, I have 2 questions actually. If people only have time to see 1 or 2 of these movies before Oscar Sunday, what do we tell them? And then maybe do we want to do a rundown of where are these movies available to watch? Because you've been doing that really nicely all along.
If you haven't seen all the Best Picture nominees, well, let's go from if you've literally seen none of these. You've had a busy year. You have you've never seen these, but you somehow got to the end of an Oscar
Well, that's fair.
podcast episode. predicting them because you just really want your ballot to be good. The two crowd pleasers are, The Holdovers is a real crowd pleaser. Everybody I've shown that movie to, and that's just a fun kind of light watch. And then I think you have to watch Oppenheimer. I mean, it's a commitment in terms of time, but it's important and it's worth seeing, and definitely the going to win. So I say those are my picks for those two. Let's see. I know American Fiction is currently VOD. It will eventually land on Prime. Anatomy of a Fall is also VOD at the moment. Barbie is available on Max. The Holdovers is available on Peacock. Killers of the Flower Moon is available on Apple TV Plus. Maestro is on Netflix. Oppenheimer has now arrived on Peacock or is about to
Correct.
arrive on Peacock. Okay, it has.
I think it has.
Past Lives is on, I saw it on Canopy, but it's also on Showtime, and that means it's on Paramount Plus if you have the new version of Paramount Plus. Poor Things is arriving this week on Hulu. Zone of Interest is still just VOD, I believe.
Nice. And honestly, thinking to years ago, that's a lot better in terms of accessibility than
Yeah,
in the
we're
past
getting
when I've
there.
tried to see all 10 Best Picture nominees. All right, Greg, I think we did a sufficient job. Hopefully people's Oscar ballots are secure. At least the first half
And
of
I was
them.
going to say, and stay tuned for part 2. Please know that behind the scenes, intense negotiations happened about which categories got to which place. Not at all. Jen divvied them up and did the responsible work, and the rest of us were like, cool, Jen, thanks for doing all the work. We'll show up and just turn on our microphones when we need to. So thank you to Jen for preparing this, and I very much look forward to hearing what our other pundits have to say. But here at the end of Oscar season, it has felt like a marathon, and why it overlapped with the Dune release, we don't know, but it has been a crazy week of podcasting, and you can look forward to us. You can do the second half with Jen, Antonio, and PT later this week, and then some or all of us, I believe we're trying for all of us, will be back to do an Oscar recap, hopefully early next week after the big show. Until then, I am Greg. You can find me on the internet, mostly on this podcast, talking about movies, because that's what I love most. And you can find me other places at Ion Cannon. Jen, where can people find you on the internet? Close us out.
You can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram and Threads. And you can find me at Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. You can also follow the show at The Long Take Review on Instagram and Threads. If you want to send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. We're LTR Pod on Letterboxd. I think that's usually all the things that PT covers at the end of the show. But yeah, so share with us, what do you think your Oscar predictions are? Did we get some of these categories wrong? I'd love to hear from you. Please help us. I don't care how I do it. I just want to get them right. I have no pride in, these sorts of situations. So yeah, reach out to us with your own Oscar picks if you have them. And thanks, Greg.
Fill in your ballot and tag it with hashtag LTRpod on Instagram and check it out and see what you're all guessing. So thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.